Hello everyone, welcome to Psychology 346, Social Psychology, and today we're going to be talking about persuasion. So, we are persuaded and we persuade other people all the time, whether it be through advertisements, through trying to convince people to hire you, through jury selection, through, trying to get your friends to go to the bar one night. We try and convince other people to modify or change their attitudes all the time. When we persuade another person, we can try to attempt to either heighten or lessen their attitude towards something. So this would be making their attitude more or less extreme. Or it can be to change their attitude entirely. So if a person has a positive attitude towards, say, parks and recreation, we might try and convince them that it's actually a bad show and switch their attitudes towards a negative attitude. There are different ways we can try to persuade someone, and there are different characteristics of an attitude or a encounter or an interaction that we can use to decide whether or not we're going to be persuaded. We can focus on the quality of the argument. We can focus on the source of the information. Who's telling us this information? Is it coming from a person, a magazine, a news article, etc.? And what is the intended recipient of the information? Are they specifically talking to me, or are they talking to, say, a subgroup of people and I just happen to be reading it? So there are different ways that we can process this information that we receive, the different ways that we can process this persuasion attempt, so to speak. We can use central route processing, which is basically focusing on the specific meat and potatoes of the argument itself. Is a person using good logic? Are they making a rational argument? Am I convinced by their specific claims? Or we can use peripheral route processing, where we're focusing more on other aspects of the persuasion attempt, such as, is the person knowledgeable? Do they seem smart? Are they famous? Do I trust them? These other characteristics other than the actual argument itself. Whether or not we focus on central or peripheral route processing depends on a number of factors. And some of the more important factors are, is this topic, is this argument personally relevant to me? And do I have enough time and attention to focus on the argument, really pay attention to the details? Now, this should seem pretty familiar. We've talked about dual process models before, and this can be applied to persuasion as well, where generally we might focus on peripheral cues, use peripheral route processing, if we don't have the motivation or capacity to really pay attention to the argument itself. So with peripheral route processing, again, we're focusing on kind of the outer aspects of the argument, and this is something that's very easy to do. We don't really put a lot of thought or time or attention into this type of processing. We use heuristics. We might focus on, is the person who's giving me this information credible? Are they attractive? Are they talking for a long time? Do they feel familiar, or does the topic feel familiar? We might be more persuaded by this type of information. Whereas with central route processing, we're focusing specifically on the quality of the argument. Is there thoughtful analysis? Is there a lot of elaboration in support of their argument? This type of processing also encourages counter-arguments. It encourages people to think rationally, logically about an argument, and then form their own opinions and maybe kind of question the person who's actually asking them in the first place. So we see a nice example of this in one study where individuals at one university, Miami University specifically, in Ohio, unfortunately not in Florida, but students were asked to read arguments that were either for or against cumulative exams at the end of their college career, basically trying to determine whether or not they're going to get their degree. These arguments were either ostensibly written by a high school graduate or a college professor, and then at the end they were discussing whether or not these would be implemented at their institution, Miami University, or a completely different university, Ohio University. And so the researchers found that people would use these peripheral cues, so focus on whether or not it was argued by whether or not the arguments were weak or strong, which was another difference, and whether or not the arguments were made by high school students or college professors. They would use these cues to determine whether or not it was a good argument, but only if it was going to be implemented at the other university. when there's a chance that this information was going to be relevant to them, if cumulative exams were going to be implemented at their university, then no matter who told them the information, they focused on the strength of the argument. They were able to discern strong arguments from weak arguments in terms of implementing these exams. So again, for people who are going to be using the central route processing, they need to be able to process the information intensely. Sometimes we can't possibly know or want to know information about a subject, such as string theory, so we're more likely to use peripheral route processing. Sometimes we just have too much going on, and we can't possibly focus our attention, so we, again, are going to use peripheral route processing. And we can use both of these types of processing when making or thinking about the same attitude object. So if someone asks me how do I feel about Microsoft Surface tablets, I might think about the commercials that I've seen, I might think about Bill Gates, I might think about the fact that I use other Microsoft products, and think, oh yeah, I guess I like them. Yeah, I like Surface, I like Microsoft for the most part, so yeah, I probably like the Surface. But if someone then asks me, all right, you need to buy a tablet, or do you want to buy Microsoft Surface? Do you want to actually put these attitudes into behaviors? Then I'm not going to use these peripheral route cues. I'm going to focus on central route. I'm going to actually do my research, look at the arguments for and against Microsoft Surface, look at what other people have said, and then use that information to determine whether or not I'm actually going to act on these behaviors. So that's all I have for today. Thank you for your time and attention. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.